Hello once again everyone, and welcome back to Getting More Out of Capoferro. So today we're moving on to plate 10, and joining me once again is Jacob. And today we're going to start talking about, last time we discussed the idea of the lines widening in this plane. Today, we're not exactly perfectly talking about the lines widening in this plane, but we are going to be doing a lot more with the idea of the vertical line. So what I mean by that is, for the most part, we've either been in the central line, wherein we're here, then we added the idea of either a pass or an incortata, which widened that horizontal plane. Today we're going to not only be dealing with a cut, but we're also going to be dealing with the idea of going up into a shape and also crushing down onto a shape. Plate 10 also has something interesting in that the hand position for the quarta is kind of debatable / interesting, which is why I'm using my slightly less complex rapier hilt so that you can see my hand a little more clearly. So, the actual action. Both fencers are standing on terza to the inside, as per standard. I find the sword in quarta, prompting Jacob to perform a cavazione into a reverso with a lunge and strike my head. So the idea here, this one in particular you'll see used by people who have a decent cutting background and can be done very easily against folks that find the sword too strongly. So for example, some people train to always find the sword in advance, which is not necessarily a bad idea, but the issue is when I bring my body closer, that gives more pressure to his sword, which Jacob can very quickly leave and then cut me. As such, this idea of just this quick over, and you can do it retreating, going forward, a bunch of different options, is something you do got to be afraid of. The benefit, though, is that for him to get a good cut, he can't just leave and cut off the elbow because his guard will still be centralized. Just to show that, let's show that briefly real quick. So if I find the sword and Jacob cuts from his elbow, so his tip's only going to go about the top of my head, really, he's still quite vulnerable to just a normal secunda counter thrust, because really, even though he's doing a cut, nothing changed all that much for him just doing a thrust with secunda. Instead, what it is that he's bringing this up, letting the arm be a little more engaged, and then really dropping down into this. And this is something that my coach used to make me practice, being able to do cuts with strength from here. So let's see that again. Wherein now, I will still do the counter thrust, but you're going to see it's a lot less effective. So when he comes up through, that's going to blow through what I put between us, because even though I had my tip on line, with it coming down from above, he's going to get that percussion. Odds are I'll get struck. If not, just we'll end up in a bind where he has the advantage because he literally has the upper hand. So, my option instead is rather than trying to go over with secunda, because I can't get back through with quarta, is I'm going to drop beneath, but I'm not really dropping my tip so much as I'm just going forward when he raises. This is where we get to the idea of elevation. Now, the thrust targeting, Jacob, let's get to the point that you're going to cut. So I find the sword, he gets up and he's bringing his arm up. My target is right here in the armpit, not here though. If he's a little more profiled, that'd change, but right now, since he's relatively square as we practice here, my target is about where his torso meets his sleeve on the most inside. The reason that matters is that unlike realism, where I'm worried about literally getting up into those veins and stopping his arm, this I'm a little bit more worried about getting kind of not quite center mass, but center mass in regards to his organs, and my blade will stop his arm rather than my hilt. You'll see when I do the full action, but basically there's the idea of historically, and you see this a lot in regards to armor stuff, if you get your tip up underneath someone's armpit, eventually it's going to hit the bone. That can move their torso as an object. I absolutely believe that this play, as there are many others like it, is using that aspect as opposed to looking for a through shot. We can't exactly get that perfectly because the blades will bend too much. So instead, I'm going for more akin to, not dissimilar to things like a longsword wind, if you use the shield or things along those lines. And I'm looking to make essentially a shelf that his arm will be stuck on when he tries to bring it down. Now, we are describing to do this in quarta. It should be noted that you're going to reach a certain level of extension here, not only just because I'm putting my arm out there, but also because I am encouraged to do this with an accrescimento, and I do recommend you do so. To be a little bit stronger against this shape, rather than just here, when we look at the image, it seems as though he has let his knuckles turn a little bit more skyward. Now, he doesn't change the position name. I don't necessarily believe he's diving straight to here, this kind of, knuckles all the way up on the inside, almost reverse prima. I think instead it's the idea of when you extend to this point, naturally your arm will start to turn up as that's just how you reach farther, plus you'll be in target by that point. So, enough prattling, let's actually get to the action. Again, intense, it's the inside. I find the sword, he goes to perform that cut, and I'm in. again, a crescimento. I did a bit more of a lunge there, but that's okay. And my arm naturally kind of turns up. I landed in quarta, but as it receives that force, I just let my head kind of drop behind it, which also keeps me safe, as Jacob can't really hinge off anything. I mean, he can try to straighten his arm, but that won't hit me. He can sort of hinge off his wrist, and in fact, on the plate, that's exactly what's happening, is that he's kind of hinged down almost like he's trying to cut around, but it can't hit me. So let's do that again. Really, the key behind this is to just look for your target area and then take it. One more time. Right in. Now, mine drifted a little more over to the side. That's okay for our purposes. It'll work. Ideally, it's anywhere between the edge of the torso and about here is where you want to hit. Any further over than that, and then you're going to have problems. Now, it should be noted for modern dealing with it, a lot of people don't do this very big cut. Most of the time when they do a cut, they're just looking to hit your arm or things along those lines. You can still use this motion to get to the inside line again, but it's going to be more as a parry. So what I mean by that is, this time Jacob will do a more narrow cut. When I find the sword and he's coming over, I can follow him and then catch the blade and kind of ride this back down to the inside. Alternatively, another option would be to retreat with that. So I find the sword, he's coming up and around, use that little cavazione to get a bit of a beat. I find that if you're not fighting against people that really cut high with good lunge, this one feels like it can kind of fall apart. But when everyone is really targeting the head with a good strong cut, this feels wonderful. But let's switch sides to the next one. So, for my next one, this is now going to be the idea of I will use a counter to escape this. And this is kind of how this is always going to flow. So we had initial action, response, and then the agent 1. Now we're going to have initial action, so Jacob is going to take over my role, and I will feint my action instead. So, Jacob finds my sword, and when I cavazione here, I am going to let my tip raise up, but I'm going to keep my body withdrawn, which means that now, unlike what we did before, wherein we were coming forward almost immediately, hence the counter hit, now when he fires in, there's a lot more gap that he's going to have to cover. Plus, I can sort of bait him a little bit more. What I'm essentially doing when he finds my sword here is that I can raise my arm up a bit higher to really convince him this is a danger as he's prompted to move forward. Otherwise, usually my arm's only going to raise about to here. Now, when Jacob fires out, I'm going to cut a half mandrito down upon his blade. You can actually do this as a reverso or a mandrito, and at first when you're practicing, you'll be tempted to do a reverso. There's a reason you're doing the mandrito. So, just hold your arm out in torso, please, if you would. Basically, what's happening here is that I draw him out into space where his tip has no presence, and I'm going to do a beat action on his blade. Since I'm here, the most natural thing that you'll do is you'll bring it down on the reverso line to try and cover that. However, there's a very important weakness you've got to be aware of. When I bring my sword down like that, it's still leaving a small little gap, even if I get my tip all the way down, that he can get through around my guard. Not to mention, he's able to cavazione around my guard and strike me in the face. If instead of coming down this line, I make sure to come down with the mandrito line, that gap is now closed off. You can't cavazione around my blade because it's in front of me. You can't cavazione under my wrist because it's coming down, and then I'm creating that nice angle that'll give me a strong beat. So what that should look like, go ahead and hold down in quarta again, is once more, I'm here, lined up for the reverso, I let my wrist bend and bring it down. This also collapses his quarta quite naturally into that hole. I don't have to worry about that anymore. Versus if I beat it out to the side, he can turn his wrist over and bring it back with a cut or things along those lines. So there is a reason for the mandrito, even though you'll feel you can do the reverso. But, let's go back to where we were in the action. So, he finds my sword, I feint, I break this, now I have two options. Option 1 is I can cut a reverso to his head, in which case once my arm is out here, I just need to line this up. There's my reverso. Option 2 is a thrust to the chest. You can do this in two ways. You can either raise into quarta, or since his blade is already there, I'll go ahead and push over in secunda, as that feels a little better for me personally. So, a pretty slick little action. Let's go one more time, then we'll switch sides and show that again. So, he finds my sword, up, break, thrust. Now we'll change sides and go one more. And that time I did a mandrito. It should be the reverso. Reason being, let's also talk about that line shift. While you can get away with that, and if you get a really good break, you'll probably get it like I did. It should be noted that the fastest thing that Jacob could move to defend himself would be to just pop his guard up in the way. So in regards to that break, let's get there. He finds my sword, right? I feint, I bop. If I go for the Mendrito line, he just lifts his guard up, he's pretty safe. Not even that much, just literally lift the guard straight up on your other shoulder. Yeah, he can get that little quick cover, versus going over here, he will have to turn his arm over, and I still have options. So there is reason, again, to go for the farther cut, which doesn't seem as fast, but has its benefits. And if anything, that's the real takeaway from this particular set. While we do deal with elevation and the idea of using, the more straight line attack, especially as a counteraction, we also kind of go over the idea of sometimes when you're implementing cuts, it's more about their resoluteness and where they can drive the person to react, as opposed to the idea of speed. If you want speed, use your point. That's what it's there for. Also, it works with the idea of, while Capoferro tends to disdain the idea of cutting in distance, he does still go over it multiple times, especially when we get to the cloak section. This is not a cut I get to just flat ignore. I have to deal with it in a very particular way, or it is going to punish me severely. And furthermore, it also deals with the idea of a suppressing cut. Now, while, as far as I remember, no rapier source calls it a suppressing cut, if those of you familiar with Ryer's rapier, this is basically what that is, that demfoul. And it's a very useful one to be able to do, because otherwise, you're just constantly doing cavaciones. Versus, oh no, I'm out of presence, right? See what that can get you, and play from there. Otherwise, thank you very much, Jacob, and thank you all very much for watching. We'll be going over some more of this another time.